Welcome to episode 44 of World Discussion with Agent Smith. Hello, Agent Smith. Hello. Hello, Agent Smith. Agent Smith. His mic is muted.
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you. Now that it's unmuted.
Ah, hey, how are you?
Solid for getting back in the swing.
Oh yeah, I was kind of surprised. I thought you'd were gonna take more time off.
Well, it's already 11 days with no full-on broadcast, so business calls.
Gotcha.
I ended up doing okay. I started out lose for like the first 4 hours, but then we finished on like an 8-game win streak, and we're pretty close to where we started.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh nice. I'm glad you're kind of getting back into the swing of it.
Yep. It's always been uncomfortable coming back. Streaming, and then on top of that, streaming StarCraft ladder is an incredibly sensory-intensive experience. And if you do it every day, your body gets used to it. That's just kind of a gear that you click into. Yeah. But if you spend the 2 weeks or whatever with family, where you just sit on a couch and watch a movie, sitting on a couch and watching a movie and streaming StarCraft ladder are two drastically different experiences.
Yeah, I can imagine.
How was your holiday?
Very fattening.
Nice.
Lots of food. Probably too much.
Well, that's the point.
Well, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if the point is to just stuff yourself over and over again. But yeah, it is kind of a correspondent. That is sort of what people generally do when they have those little family get-togethers. Something you can have in common. Other than that,
So what happened in the world?
I mean, there's been some drama, but it's kind of meh. It's either stuff that could be substantive, but we won't really know until later, or stuff that's kind of not that substantive right now. So nothing too dramatic, really. I mean, the big thing was, has been the Trump administration kind of letting people go, getting rid of Kelly and Mattis. Hope I'm remembering that right. So there's been some concern that maybe the quote-unquote adults in the room, such as they've been called up till now, kind of won't be there, and that maybe the Trump administration will be more Trumpian going forward, that there will be more breaks with tradition and norms going forward in the final 2 years of the first term. Whether or not that's true kind of remains to be seen. It's not really clear. Which is why I say that it's not... It could be significant, but we don't really know yet, because we don't really know what the impact will be, what the administration will look like going forward. So that's kind of a wait-and-see thing.
Brief interjection, we just got a 335 viewer host from Inmate, who's a Dota personality from Russia, so welcome. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, you got a lot of people watching today. Well done.
Здравствуйте. Yeah, we had Todd host. He's a French pro gamer and caster. He gave us like 1,400.
Oh wow.
Which was super awesome. It's always good coming back and getting a ton of support on the first day, because over the course of the trip you know that your subscriber count has fallen off and you lose a lot of momentum, so you're kind of concerned, which makes it harder to enjoy the time off. But then this happens and it's like, man, I just feel really valued. It's awesome.
Oh, cool. I'm glad you're able to have that kind of networking there going on. That's useful. That's good Guangxi.
What is up with the Huawei situation? I don't know how to pronounce that. Huawei?
Have you ever heard of Huawei?
No, what is that?
Actually, that's a good question. Huawei, well, it's a Chinese company. I think they originated as being kind of like the Chinese equivalent of Cisco networking, kind of a networking company, telecommunications company, if you will, but I think they've branched out a lot from that. So I think they kind of do a lot of different things. It's a tech company, let's put it like that. It's a Chinese tech company, and there's been kind of a big hue and cry over the past, especially the past year, but it had kind of already been building for a couple years, about whether or not other countries would allow Huawei to come in and invest in their telecommunications infrastructure. Because there was a concern about allowing a big company like that has such close ties, relatively close ties anyway, to the Communist Party of China to come in and control a sensitive piece of a country's infrastructure like that. You know, because there's fears about espionage, surveillance, data privacy, etc., things like that. Basically, it's a national security concern that some countries have, especially the United States.
So to clarify, the difference between Huawei and telecom companies in a lot of other countries is this is a company that is political in addition to being an economic entity, which is why it's more of a concern.
Well, kind of. That's the problem with that statement, is that it's well, there's not a problem with that statement per se, but the issue is that we don't really know the extent to which Huawei is kind of interacting with the party. It's kind of, I mean, given China's legal system, you kind of assume that the party has at least some influence, given that they can, just given that they can lean on a given company and kind of force them to do this, that, or the other. So it's assumed that the Huawei, at the very least, could be an apparatus, an extension of the party. But it may be they're even closer to that, or even that it's kind of a de facto state company, you know, the degree, in so much as the party kind of wants the company to succeed as a vanguard, as a company that is the vanguard of technological modernization in China's economy. But that's all kind of muddy because, again, there's no transparency in China's political system, so nobody really knows for sure. And that's kind of the real issue. I mean, it's one thing to have a state-owned enterprise that's trying, that is part of a broader industrial policy that's trying to modernize a country. You know, that's one thing. It's another thing to be really ambiguous about it, to kind of say one thing about wanting free trade and fair trade, blah, 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 and then to kind of turn around and be very cagey about the degree to which you might be giving, a government might be giving their companies an unfair advantage in trade. And so that just ties into that overarching debate in other countries about the national security implications. But those national security implications also have to do with that uncertainty, because you don't really know the extent to which companies are being used by the Chinese government to spread Chinese influence, or could be used by the Chinese government to do damage in the event of a conflict or if tensions were to rise. So it's a muddy discussion. It's more about the uncertainty than it is about known problems with the relationship between Huawei and the Chinese government. Mm. So you're not really wrong, but I want to kind of add that context. You know, it's kind of like in the Cold War, where and I don't want to say that the United States is entering a new Cold War, because I don't think that's true either, but that's a whole other debate. But kind of in the Cold War, the problem the U.S. had was not necessarily that there were communists or leftists, you know, in other places. The problem was more that there was uncertainty about the degree to which communist parties in given countries were interacting with or even being led by the Bolsheviks and the Soviet Union. Early on in the Cold War, there was a very strong suspicion, a belief, you know, even among many people, that the Soviets were just controlling all of the world's communist parties, basically. And that if a communist party in another country took power, then de facto the Soviets would more or less have control over that country's politics, internal and external. So that uncertainty was kind of more the problem from the U.S. national security apparatus's perspective, necessarily than just the politics of communism, although that was also itself a problem to a degree. So that's kind of what we have now. You know, national security institutions in any country are very risk-averse and paranoid, and so they don't like uncertainty like that. And China's political system is designed to be opaque, and so that creates a lot of uncertainty, and that's kind of where the problems start. You know, if you're an intelligence agency or defense department in another country besides China, and you're kind of looking at what the Chinese are doing around the world and looking at all the ambiguities in the Chinese economy and the state's power and all that, then you kind of assume the worst and try to plan around that worst case assumption. And so that's why this debate is kind of emerging. It's emerged more rapidly and dramatically under the Trump administration, because of course the Trump administration is very hawkish about China and the prospective and possible threat posed by China to the United States. And so we're seeing a lot more of that being discussed right now. So that's where the Huawei issue comes from. There's other Chinese companies, but Huawei has kind of been singled out as a particular point of contention because it is investing in and controlling telecommunications infrastructure, which means that they could survey people's communications, their emails, or etc. Hypothetically, I'm not saying they're doing that or not doing that, but that's sort of the criticism.
You mean like they do here?
Yeah. Well, yeah, but here the national security apparatus is on top of that. That's their thing. You know, it's the competition they don't like.
Oh, so it's okay as long as we're the only ones who do it.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Pretty much. Well, again, it's all about trust and uncertainty, right? Like, if you control it, then you don't worry about it because you're the one doing it. But if somebody else is, you know, can you really trust them? What are their motives? Like, how can you make sure you control their actions? And if you can't, then should you take action to rectify that? And security institutions all over the world almost universally say, yeah, we should definitely do that. Now, whether or not that becomes policy is kind of a function of different countries' political systems. You know, if you have an authoritarian political system where the military has a lot of power, then the military generally gets its way, or the security institutions anyway get their way, and generally there's some nationalizations or there's rules put in place that make foreign investment difficult. If you have more of an open political system of one sort or another, there's more of a conversation that takes place, and maybe there's rules that make it difficult for, say, Huawei to invest, but maybe you kind of take a softer line and say you can invest if you do this, that, or the other, just to prove to us that you're not going to do anything shady, or maybe you just open the gates and say, yeah, we don't care, we needed the money, so just do whatever you want. You can kind of see case studies in each of those veins in different places. You know, the UK has kind of been in trouble with the US over the past few years because they've not opened the gates completely to Huawei, but they've been more willing to allow Huawei to invest in the UK's market. And that's kind of upset the US government a bit, because they're not really allowing them much at all. And they don't really like the idea of a really important ally like the UK giving the Huawei more room to invest. Because even though the UK is a separate country, given the closeness between the UK and US intelligence agencies, defense departments, blah, 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 etc., there is kind of a fear that maybe Huawei will find a way to kind of worm their tech in there somewhere and use it to spy on behalf of China. Sorry, what?
Just Huawei finding a way. I mean, if there's a company that has its name that sets up a pun there, well, you found it. Oh, I'm sorry. That wasn't worth the interruption.
No,
I just scoffed because I thought of it, but then I didn't want to say it, but then you asked, so...
No, feel free. Feel free. It's the internet. There are far darker things. So by all means. But yeah, that's basically the Huawei issue in a nutshell. You know, as in so much as I can remember it anyway. So there's that. There's the Trump thing. There's the Syria thing. Did you hear about that?
So, the U.S. is pulling out, and that's good for Russia?
Debatable, but yeah, basically the Trump administration announced that the U.S. would be pulling out of Syria relatively soon.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's actually going to happen. I don't think I've read anything to the effect that it's happened yet. And in the past, in fact, you remember that Syria podcast I did?
Mm-hmm.
Last year, I think I released that in like January. And I think the last episode was basically just talking about the recent announcement that had been released just as I was finishing the series, that the Trump administration was going to pull out of Syria, or was going to, you know, start pulling out or something to that effect. So that was kind of a big deal, and I kind of had to dedicate the last episode to kind of exploring what the significance was of that. But nothing ever really came of it, because the Trump administration had advisors within the administration that kind of advised against it, and I don't know what they did, because there's been a lot of talk about people kind of being sneaky and taking papers off the president's desk and things like that, just to try to kind of cajole him or coerce him in one way or the other to try to steer his policy decisions. But however it was done, the Trump administration ended up walking back from that statement that the U.S. was going to pull out. It might be that that happens again, but it's not really clear because, again, there's been some important leading figures in the administration that have left, and it may be that those were kind of the people who were doing that, who were kind of changing the president's mind or reining him in, or however you want to frame that. So we'll see. But nominally, there was that announcement. Who it's going to benefit if it actually does come to pass is kind of unclear. I mean, if the U.S. does leave, then that would leave a vacuum. The U.S. has not been really active in the Syrian conflict. It's been doing a little bit here and there, but it's mostly been ineffective. The most leverage the United States has is that it could do more. It is nominally in the conflict. It has troops on the ground, and it's been acting as a kind of bulwark against Turkish or Syrian aggression against the SDF, which is basically the big Kurdish/Arab group in eastern Syria. So the Kurds are kind of the weakest group in this whole Syria conflict, but because the U.S. is there providing an umbrella, they've managed to survive because nobody wants to mess with the U.S. because the U.S., although again that hasn't done much, it's still the most powerful, technically the most powerful actor there. Mm-hmm. So if the U.S. leaves, that definitely shifts the balance of power and changes the dynamic. In that series I did, kind of I explored a bit about how if the U.S. did kind of leave, because either the U.S. commits and does a lot more, or it leaves. That was kind of my two predictions. I didn't really count on the U.S. kind of half-assing it for another year, so we'll see. We'll see if maybe that's the decision again. But again, anyway, if the U.S. does leave, I think the long-term. This is a guess, so don't take it to the bank. But I would guess that there would be a kind of rapprochement between the Syrian government and the Turkish government, and possibly also the Iranian government. That would come to a kind of agreement to freeze the conflict, basically, and to just kind of let things sit where they are, at least in terms of the border or the demarcation line, let's put it like that, between the Syrian rebels and Idlib province that are more influenced by Turkey and the Syrian government to the south of them. But then I think part of that agreement would also be cooperation between the Turks and the Syrians against the Kurds. Because the Turkish government, of course, is not comfortable with the YPG or the SDF, which is basically just an extension of the YPG in eastern Syria. They want to go and do something about them. If the U.S. is gone, they could definitely do that, and if they could do it with Syrian help, all the better for them. And so the whole conflict could be wrapped up, not completely, but the biggest antagonist kind of has been Turkey from the start. So if Turkey and Syria could come to an agreement, that kind of kills two birds with one stone for both of them. That's takes care of the Kurdish problem for the Turks, and for the Syrian government, it kind of ends conflict with their biggest threat, their biggest foreign threat in terms of support for rebels. So that would be good. That doesn't really deal with the whole Iran-Saudi rivalry and the conflict, the proxy conflict that's been going on there. But the Turks have the greater capacity in terms of intelligence assets and military assets, and they're right on the border as well. So I think the Syrian government would like the chance, would be attracted to the opportunity anyway, to kind of wind down conflict with them, try to come to some kind of accord there. So I suspect that's more the direction things would go. It might be that if that's the case, it might be that the Saudis, in conjunction with the Israelis, might start supporting the Kurds, just as a proxy against the Iranians. And even if they don't do that, I still think the Saudis and Israelis would probably still be doing missile strikes and things in Syria. That hasn't stopped either. So it could be that the conflict shifts in tone from a Turkish attempt to overthrow the Syrian government to more of a Saudi-Israeli attempt to push the Iranians out of Syria. And I don't think the Syrian government is going to have much say regardless, because it's kind of too weak to really do anything to contribute much to either of those. It's going to depend more on how much Russia wants to commit and how much the Iranians want to commit. I don't think the Russians are really that interested in propagating the conflict. Their whole mission was just keep Assad in power, protect the government, and they've pretty much done that. Everything else is kind of just extra bullshit for them, and it's more of a headache than it's worth, probably. I mean, the recent thing that happened, for example, is that there's a city called Manbij, which is sort of one of the it's kind of like a frontier city. It's right on the demarcation line between, I think, Turkish rebels and the SDF, I think, kind of. And what happened was the SDF actually invited some Syrian army troops onto the demarcation line, not into the city. That was kind of misreported at some point. There actually are still US forces apparently in the city, as well as SDF forces, and no Syrian army units. But there were Syrian army units invited to take up positions in front of Manbij, kind of between the Turks and Manbij. So that kind of suggests that the Syrian government might be responding to a US pullout by trying to make a deal with the Kurds to create a common front against Turkey. So that's possible. That's a way that they could do that, because that kind of brings all that eastern Syrian territory under the Syrian government's fold again, technically, since it would kind of still be technically occupied by the SDF. But it may be that it's a trade-off that the Syrian government is willing to make in order to kind of be able to say that it's reunified the country. But I don't think it's really viable, because I don't think the Turkish government is going to accept it, because that still basically allows the SDF and the YPG to continue to kind of exist unmolested in that eastern Syria region. So I think it's more likely, if that does happen and continue to kind of evolve, that the Turkish government will kind of drop the hammer. And the Syrian government will be in a spot, because the Syrian government, again, is not powerful enough to stop a concerted effort by Turkey to really kind of push into that eastern Syrian territory held by the Kurds. You know, even if it's just Turkish-backed rebels, if they get enough support of one sort or another from Turkey, I don't think the Syrian army would be able to hold out. And especially not if the Turkish army proper were sent in, which is possible. I don't think the Turkish government really ever wanted to send the Turkish army into Syria for the actual civil war, you know, like in Idlib province. They've done it a couple times, but it's been very limited, and they've been very cautious about that. But I think they would be much more willing to do it in eastern Syria, because technically there is that terrorist threat there, as they call it. You know, the PKK is technically a terrorist group, and the YPG does have links to them, so the Turkish government could claim that it's a counterterrorism mission and that they are justified in sending the military in, given that they have this serious security threat emanating from the region. Kind of a safe haven argument, so to speak. You know, the Kurds, the PKK/YPG has a safe haven in eastern Syria, so we're justified in sending troops there to deal with it. That kind of logic, basically. So if the Turkish army rolls in, then the Syrian army is not going to be able to stop them. You know, the Turkish army is pretty good. So in that case, the Syrian government would basically have to go to its allies and ask them for help. And so they would go to the Iranians, and then they would go to the Russians. I don't know how much the Iranians could really contribute to that, because the Iranian military itself is not in great shape, and I don't think the Iranian expeditionary force, so to speak, in Syria is going to be really strong enough to stop a concerted Turkish offensive over there either. They could help, but I don't think there's enough of them there, and I don't think they're in good enough shape after many years of grueling fighting to really be able to stop a major offensive like that. So it would probably come down to the Russians, I would guess. I would guess it would kind of come down to whether the Russians really wanted to kind of fight the Turks if they did that, but I doubt they would, because I don't think Russia really wants to antagonize Turkey too much. They're willing to antagonize them in so much as doing so is required to keep the Assad government in power. But beyond that, I think Russia values its relationship with Turkey as an economic market and potential strategic partner more than it values Syria, because Syria is kind of a failed state. They've got a base there that they don't really use much. It's not a big market. It's not really a great partner as far as allies go. So I think the Russians will stay in and maintain the leverage in the region by protecting the Assad government, but I don't really think they're going to go to bat for the Assad government as far as going to war with all of the countries that are sort of arrayed against Syria. And when I say go to war, I don't mean like formally go to war. I just mean attacking Assad's enemies in Syria. You know, they'll attack the rebels, maybe some in Idlib. They did in Daraa, sort of in the south. They might do some in the east, but I think at this point, any further action by Russia would have to pretty much target one of the other major actors, like the Saudis, the Israelis, or the Turks, and their groups, their proxy groups in Syria. And I don't think it's worth it for them. You know, I think they would rather cut a deal of some kind with the Saudis or the Turks, get some benefits, make some trades, and then basically probably get some economic concessions of some kind, because Turkey's a major gas partner. And the Saudis have kind of been working more with them in terms of oil production. You know, Russia's not a member of OPEC, but there's been a lot more cooperation over the past few years. So it may be that they're interested in making a trade in one of those areas, you know, getting a concession there in exchange for them holding back and not really going all out to back Assad and kind of reconquering all of Syria. I suspect that's going to be the more attractive option for Moscow. Again, just my guess. This whole thing is basically just a long-winded guess, but I'm just outlining it just to kind of flesh it out for everybody.
So we've talked some about the geographical basis for a lot of these conflicts and points of contention and whatnot. It seems like Syria is kind of like Turkey between a lot of powerful actors, but unlike Turkey, it doesn't have a bunch of power compared to its neighbors in the region. So,
which country were you referring to?
Syria.
Ah, yeah.
Because some people were saying that it's important to Russia. I think, is that geographically? Let me pull up a map. The map.
Geographically, in so much as they have that base at Latakia. Actually, they've got, I think, more bases now, don't they? I think they've got an air base they opened up somewhere. But yeah, they've got a couple bases there. But I'm not really convinced by the logic that the Russian government just really wants those bases. I mean, they never really used them before for much. So their utility is kind of limited, you know, and it's really expensive to be kind of bogged down in a conflict there over the long term. And, you know, especially with the U.S. in eastern Syria, it's not clear, like, what they can really do. With the U.S. gone, they've got more options, but it involves, again, some kind of conflict with regional powers, and they kind of don't want that. I mean, at this point, if Russia actually did something to really help Assad in a significant way, it would invariably involve pissing off a major regional power. And that's kind of bad for them, because that just makes it more costly and difficult to prop up the Assad government. I mean, they could kind of appease Iran and help them out, you know, and then just sort of support Assad in allowing the Iranians to stay in Syria. But then that aggravates the Saudis and the Israelis. And those are not really countries you want to be on bad terms with, because they've got a lot of ability to kind of wreck your day if they really want to. You know, Syria over the past 10-some years has been a case in point of that. On the other hand, you can help out the Saudis and Israelis, but then the Iranians are upset, and Russia has relations, economic and military relations with them. You can help out, you know, you can help out the Kurds, but then the Turks are pissed off. Like, everything comes with a big cost. Every major strategic move Russia could make now comes with a big cost. And so for them, I think it's going to be easier just to cut a deal and kind of sit back and let everybody kind of fight each other. So long as Assad isn't under direct threat, they'll probably just kind of let everybody figure it out themselves. So without that Russian support, to kind of bring this full circle, without that Russian support, the Syrian government's not going to be able to stop the Turks from pushing around the Kurds. So I don't think an alliance between the Kurds and the Syrian government is going to be really viable. I could be wrong again, but that's just my prediction. I just think that given that's the case, given that I think that's the case, I think a deal between Turkey and the Syrian government is just more viable and more likely. It's going to be more attractive to everybody, I think.
We've talked in some of the previous episodes, too, about power vacuums, and the power vacuum that was created from the Iraq War was part of what allowed ISIS to emerge. And then they did a big land grab, but it wasn't one that was able to stabilize into a actual nation. So then that vacuum is open again, and this kind of seems like Syria has a bunch of territory kind of on the eastern side that was involved with that. So it kind of brought it all into the vortex of contested territory. Now everybody wants a little piece of the pie. And they have
kind of.
Well, they have, like, with Turkey versus the Kurds. The Kurds are like that demographic that wants a piece of everyone's pie, but no one wants to share.
Yeah, it's kind of true. Fairly accurate. Yeah, it's just they're in the pie, so to speak, though. They're not asking for other people's pie. They're asking for the pie that they already have, technically, since they are the ethnic majority and sort of that intersection between Iran, Turkey, and Iraq, sort of around there. But yeah, that the collapse of Islamic State did kind of create a vacuum, but there was kind of already a vacuum. I mean, the Kurds, before the Islamic State came into the picture, were basically neutral in the Syrian civil war. They weren't really fighting the Syrian government, but neither were they really siding with them. They were just kind of sitting back and waiting to see how things panned out. And that's when the Islamic State kind of flooded in and took all that territory there. I guess I should point out that not all of eastern Syria is Kurdish. It's actually a pretty small part of eastern Syria that's really Kurdish. A lot of it is Arab. And in the earlier years of the civil war, most of that Arab territory was controlled by sundry rebel groups of one sort or another. But because those rebel groups were pretty weak and governance was weak, the Islamic State pretty much had no problem just kind of flooding in. So it was kind of basically already a vacuum, and the Islamic State just kind of inflated into it. You know, some people made it out to be like this grand expansion, like, oh, they just went in and conquered everybody, and they're impossible to defeat. But not really. It's more they just moved into some land, and nobody was defending it really. So they just kind of took it by default.
Are you saying they cheesed?
Pretty much.
They cheesed and then they didn't tech up and macro up to extract the value of their territory they commanded.
That's actually pretty accurate.
Oh,
you know,
man.
they were not master strategists. I mean, the whole Islamic State strategy was terrible to begin with. I mean, if you're a rebel or a guerrilla or a terrorist or whatever, you know, the last thing, your big advantage is that you're behind the scenes. It's that you're underground, that your opponent can't really see you and strike at you readily. So to just come above ground and seize territory and just be on the battlefield, that's not a good move. You know, it was pretty much inevitable that they were going to get wound up eventually by one force or another. I'm surprised they didn't get crushed sooner. I mean, I think the only reason they lasted as long as they did had more to do with politics than anything. You know, who's going to deal with this problem? Nobody really wanted to do it because everybody knew it would be expensive, a big pain in the ass, it would be violent, there would be losses. I mean, whoever did it, it was a dirty job, and everybody wanted somebody else to do it.
Yeah.
But once it was decided, it was pretty much a done deal. There was never really much chance that the IS was going to hold that territory over the long term. Not sure how I got onto that.
Well, I mentioned ISIS in regards to the power vacuum, which kind of pulled
yeah,
Syria
the Syrian
into
rebels in eastern Syria just kind of folded. Islamic State moved in, and then the Kurds kind of became the proxy of choice for the West, and the U.S. in particular, to kind of fight them. And so then the Kurds moved into that territory. So it's kind of always been in flux, basically. That eastern Syria territory there. It would have been filled again by Turkey or the Syrian government or somebody else, but the U.S. kind of planted its feet in the region just to protect the Kurds while they were fighting the Islamic State. And so the U.S. has kind of been that shield there, preventing other factions from picking apart SDF gains. But again, you know, if the U.S. leaves, then that's pretty much over. I don't know how that pans out. We'll see. Something to keep an eye on. Let's see. So there was, I guess those were kind of the big things over the past week or two. A couple other minor items, but I don't know if oh, you know, this might encourage people, some Christmas cheer for you. There was a U.S. criminal justice reform bill passed. It kind of flew under the radar, I thought. But Congress did a thing, to their credit.
Wow.
Yeah. Let's see. So some of the things they did, they reduced the 3 strikes penalty for drug felons from life in prison to 25 years. For those not from the United States, not familiar with the 3 strikes penalty, basically that's just if you get convicted rather of drug felonies 3 times, then on that 3rd time it's mandatory life in prison. I don't know why they picked 3. It's kind of a baseball reference. Not sure where that, somebody more familiar with the law in question or criminal justice.
Baseball is America's pastime, dude.
Yeah. But that was reduced. Sorry, go ahead.
Jail sports, it's all the same thing.
Well, there are a lot of rules in both, and I'm not much interested in either, so I can relate. So the required sentence went from life in prison to 25 years for that 3 strikes penalty. It limited the disparity in sentencing guidelines between powder and crack cocaine, which had kind of been a source of animus, because it's one of the reasons that there's a disparity between sentencing of African Americans and white people in the United States, because in general, African Americans get longer sentences for the same crimes.
Right.
And one of the ways that happens is, I think, please somebody correct me on this if I'm getting it wrong, I don't want to misinform people, but this is my understanding. One of the ways that happens is because there's a difference in how powder cocaine offenses are treated from crack cocaine offenses. So, you know, crack cocaine is kind of more the poor person's choice. You know, that's been more predominant. That hit African American communities particularly hard in the 80s, and it still kind of percolates. Whereas sort of the wealthier consumers, if you will, of that drug tend to go more for powder, I think. So they tried to deal with that issue. Let's see. So the reform also allows more criminals to serve their sentences in halfway houses or under home confinement. It also requires offenders to be jailed within 500 miles of their families. So some quality of life changes there. Basically, also reduces the strain on the prison system. So the United States has quite a few people in prison.
Yeah, and the number has been continuing to go up, which it's kind of like, are we becoming worse people? Or what is the deal here?
Probably. I have a low opinion of people in general, so that certainly appeals to my cynical nature. But I don't know if I have any evidence to really back that up. But yeah, that's something to relieve the pressure on the prison system. You know, kind of gets more people out, and it also, the prison system in the U.S. is not very good at kind of what's the word I want? Not re-educating.
Rehabilitate.
Rehabilitate. Thank you. It's not very good at rehabilitation. It's not really designed much for that.
It's for punishment.
Yes, Americans love their punishment. Punish the evil. Sort of appeals to that Puritan history, that Puritan lineage will kind of run strong in American political culture. So there's a move away from that, just kind of taking it a little easier, getting people away from that prison culture and giving them a chance to kind of live out. They're still being punished, but they're not being punished as harshly. So another thing, female prisoners, the reform bans the shackling of pregnant prisoners, and it mandates that tampons and sanitary napkins be available to female prisoners. So some more quality of life changes there. The reform also reduces the mandatory minimum sentences for serious drug crimes. So that's something that reformers have been pushing for a while. And the reform authorizes $375 million in federal spending for job training and educational programs for prisoners. We'll see how that's implemented. That could be good, or maybe just wasted money. It just depends on implementation. So we'll see what comes of that. But it could be a forward step, just depending on how it pans out. So that's the reform in a nutshell. That's what I read about in the article. I read about it anyway. So if you're not familiar with it, you know, that kind of gets you up to speed on it. But I thought it was a nice bit of news, you know, since the Congress in the U.S. has not really been known over the past few years for really accomplishing much of anything of substance. So it was nice to kind of see something getting done. It's not, you know, I'm sure they could have done more. There's probably still stuff reformers would like to do. I'm sure there's still issues and whatnot, but it's a step. Mm-hmm. It's something.
We agreed on a thing. Wow.
That was very... And I thought I was cynical.
Praise democracy. We're saved.
Yeah. No, I know the feeling. Throwing that out there in the spirit of the season.
It's good.
Let's see, what else? I think we did have some questions, so maybe I should go. Well, I'll ask you, is there anything else that you kind of wanted to
We didn't have anyone doing questions, so did questions appear? I question these questions.
Sorry, what?
We don't have a question person. Where did the questions
well,
come from? Or were
there
these
were
leftover?
some that popped up here.
Oh.
I think Whiskery Ant posted a couple, I think.
Oh, sweet. Stepping up to
Or
the
did he?
plate.
Oh, wait, maybe that was... Yeah, I think that was last time. Never mind.
Well, we can tackle those then.
Oh, there you go. That'll work. Let's see. Where did we leave off exactly? I think I got to the Mexico-Latin America question. So, what are the chances the U.S. actually extradites Gulen to Turkey? Pretty much none, I don't think, because I don't think there's any legal grounds for it. I'm not familiar exactly with the rules on extradition, but there are restrictions on when you can do it. It's not like another country you have an extradition agreement with can just demand that you start deporting this, that, or the other person because they say so. You know, there actually does kind of have to be grounds to extradite. And I don't think the criteria has been met by the Turkish government's request. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not really sure on the specifics of that. I'm not sure what technically is holding it up, but every time the Trump administration or even the Obama administration says that they might do it, then it kind of comes out that no, can't do it, not technically legal. So I don't think they can right now.
Can't do that.
Status.
You can't do that.
Yeah, institutions are in the way, basically. It may be that a dedicated enough administration might be able to force it through somehow, but it would probably be more trouble than it was worth. And I don't even, again, not a lawyer, so I don't even know how they would do that, but technically an outside possibility. If Andrew Jackson can ignore the Supreme Court, then it could hypothetically happen again, so you never know. Let's see. Can we do... I think we got to that one. Oh, okay, I remember this one. Somebody was asking... So I talked a bit about Japan's economy, and I kind of mentioned the idea that the current generation will kind of adjust to structural economic changes. And so the current wave of political discontent, this applies not just to Japan, but sort of the world, you know, if not developed countries in particular, but you know, structural economic change has caused a lot of political waves, political disruption, and part of the reason for that political disruption is because people have seen their traditional livelihoods disrupted, such that they kind of can't keep doing them. You know, people who worked in factories for 30 years, 40 years, whatever, are kind of out of the job and don't really know what to do. Their skills don't really translate easily to new jobs, and so they kind of end up with worse jobs than they had before, and so they don't like that. And so a lot of people ask, well, why is this happening? And then there's not really an easy, simple explanation for it, so a lot of people kind of latch on to basically blaming this, that, or the other group, or blaming this, that, or the other reason, or what have you. So it creates a lot of discontent that manifests politically, basically. And so we were kind of talking about how that's going to pass, how to kind of deal with that, and I think that's what we were doing anyway. It's been 2 weeks. But off the top of my head, I think that's the case. And the way that I think that's going to play out is that basically that generation that's really been impacted is just going to kind of age out. And the current generation, which is growing up in the current economy, is going to see where the opportunities are, where the good jobs are, and how the economy works. You know, what's expected of them, what they can not expect, etc. And then they can kind of design and structure their life accordingly. So they're not going to be like the previous generation, which kind of structure their life assuming a given type of economy, given opportunities, just different assumptions about the way the world worked, and then just had the rug kind of pulled out from under them because of a lot of technological change, international trade, etc. So there's discontent from them because of that, but then the kids, the young generation growing up in the current economy, they're not going to have that, because they're going to have made that adjustment. So when I talk about the new generation or the next generation, I'm not referring to any specific generation. I'm just talking in general about young people who kind of have the opportunity to grow up and evolve in the economy and not kind of be sideswiped by its changes as much as sort of a previous generation, which had a lot more vested in the previous economic system, such as it was, previous industries, previous jobs, what have you. So that's what I meant by new generation.
We got a question about the shutdown standoff for the budget.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So, if I can take an initial pass at this, my reaction is that isn't this a tradition? Isn't this an American tradition that's been going on for years now?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like that posturing of sometimes you go into a place with an idea of how much money you want to spend, and there might be a number that you would agree to, but you still reject that to try and get something even closer to the number you want. It seems like this is just a team game version of that.
Yeah.
That little mini game.
Yeah. Yeah, it's political theater. That's basically all it is. You know, they're going to position, jockey, have a bunch of PR. I think Donald Trump actually had his meeting with the leadership of the Democrats in the Senate and House, in public. He actually met them in front of cameras and had the press there, and they had this really weird, awkward exchange. You know, I don't know if you saw that, but it was very surreal, you know, and I don't know what he expected to come of that. I mean, basically, they just said, "We don't want the wall." And he said, "Well, I do." And so then they just kind of go back and forth, and nothing came of it. It's all just PR at this point. I don't know if what the end game will be. Maybe things will change if it lasts long enough for the new Congress to come in, because the House of Representatives is going to be controlled by Democrats, and the new Senate, rather the new House of Representatives. So it would seem that the president would have an incentive to try to do a deal now when the Republicans still have majority in the House.
Wait, so he's putting the wall in the budget?
He wants money for it in the budget.
Some. Not the whole thing, but enough to get it started.
I'm not sure exactly how much he's asking for, because he's, at least in public, he's cagey, right? He says, "I want money for the wall." Whether he would accept some or full or whatever it is he's demanding, not really clear to me. It could be, you know, being Trump, I'm sure he would make a deal of some kind, which he did not get full funding.
Yeah, because we've talked about this in the past. W. Bush made a border fence during his tenure, and that's something that the people who are trying to cross the border have addressed, not by going over it, but by going under it. So can't you beat a higher wall with the same tunnel you had before? They would need to be something that goes both up and down, which is it just makes it more expensive.
Yeah. Yeah, technically possible. The Israelis have been doing that. You know, the Israelis and their weird little conflict with the Palestinians. That's a whole other conversation. You know, there's this weird arms race, if you could call it that, only instead of arms, it's like rocks and walls and stuff. So like the
Tower
Palestinians
defense.
had, yeah, pretty much. You know, the Palestinians had been digging tunnels under the border, and I think Gaza is where it had been happening. So, you know, Hamas had been digging tunnels, terror tunnels, as the Israelis call them, under the... yeah, that's kind of that was my response, pretty much. But Hamas was digging tunnels under that border into Israeli territory, and so then the Israelis had to respond. So they started, for one, they built walls that went like 20, 30 feet into the ground, basically. And they also started developing anti-tunnel technology, basically technology that could kind of sense one, when somebody was building a tunnel, and also maybe, I don't remember if they developed the one where they just detect the tunnel outright, but I think they were working on that too. So they've developed that to the point where they can, you know, kind of target the tunnels and get rid of them with more efficiently than they could before.
It's a tunnel versus anti-tunnel tech race. I see.
Yeah. Yeah. So technically the United States could do something like that all along the border with Mexico, but that, as you can imagine, that would be very expensive, because you wouldn't just be building a wall. You would be building, I guess it's just a wall. The whole thing is a wall, even the part that's underground, right? It's not like a special, all right. So you would be building not only that wall and having it go underground, you would also have to develop the technology, buy the technology to, you know, kind of search for tunnels and have people using that technology all along the border and a whole kind of institutional apparatus designed to manage that. And the cost adds up, because the border with Mexico is very long. And whether or not it's worth the effort, that's subjective. That comes down to personal opinion. I'm not going to tell people to believe on that. They can kind of come to their own conclusions. But it's definitely going to be a major project. And I don't think it's going to cost just $5 billion. It'll probably be a good deal more than that.
But if we get information from the Israelis about how to build the anti-tunnel, then they're going to talk to the Palestinians about the anti-tunnel technology. Or no, the even better, the next level tunnel technology. And it's just going to go on forever. Why don't we just go to space instead? Think about
$5 billion? You're going to need more than that.
$5 billion to go to space?
Yeah, it's more expensive than that, isn't it? Or am I wrong?
No, you're probably right.
I'm
But
old.
But we could build at least a rocket or two with that money.
You could buy a lot of tacos. Let's put it like that.
You could buy a lot of food.
Yeah, that's a lot of tacos you could give out for $5 billion. Basically, your point is that there's an opportunity cost. In terms of any policy, but spending money on a major wall, set of border defenses like that, there's alternative priorities that you could prioritize over it and maybe get more utility from, so to speak. And that's kind of the debate. To what degree should the United States be doing more to police the border? Is a wall the right way to do it? Is there other things that we could be doing that are maybe more important? So maybe we could kind of delay dealing with the border. I know we've already delayed doing something about it for a while, but that's kind of how the debate is unfolding.
But the border this whole time, it's all about symbolism. How expensive does symbolism need to be, for real?
Symbolism can be very, very expensive.
Yeah, is there not a more affordable, symbolic thing that we could focus on? This is a very expensive.
But it's the expense that gives it value. That's the thing.
Right.
It's like sacrificing goats.
What?
You could just sacrifice one goat, but is that really as good as sacrificing 1,000 goats? 1,000 goats is more expensive, but it's a bigger gesture. It
depends on if you're a goat. Man. Do we have any...
The point is...
Do we have any goats in the chat? I'm sorry you had to hear that. Goats. He didn't mean it like that. He's just using an example. Greatest of all time.
I'm sure the goat men listening will be okay with it. I'm sure they know what I mean. I have a strong record with the goat men community.
Oh, wow. Really? Nice.
Donated to a lot of their charities. No, but that's... I don't even remember what my point was.
It doesn't matter anymore. The goats win.
Goats all.
No, I asked about the wall versus the fence versus going under the wall. And then we went to Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and then we ended up with goats.
Then we ended up with goats.
Yeah, and we're both we're both sober here too, which is amazing that we achieved that.
That's not unusual for us.
Yeah, well, it was annoying to me earlier because I was, like bobbing my head to music, and people just assumed drugs. Yep, gotta be drugs. Look at the way he's swaying to that song that's playing.
You know what it is? It's the hair. Any man with hair that long must be on something.
I thought you were gonna say in the Bible, but then you said drugs.
In the Bible, I guess I do remember some Bible school. There was definitely a lot of people with long hair in the Bible cartoons, such as they were.
Yeah.
Let me ask you something. This is something I've been kind of wondering for a long time now, and this is kind of non sequitur. I remember watching a cartoon in Bible. I don't remember. It was like Awana or something, some Bible thing as a kid. And Jesus went into like some kind of market and just went batshit insane. He was just turning over tables and all kinds of crazy shit. Did that ever actually happen in the Bible? Like, what was that?
Yes. So basically, there were people who were called the Philistines, and the Philistines were the people of the country who had a lot of political and religious power, if I understand correctly, and they were very much sticklers for rules rather than spiritual guides. So the power shift in the Christian Bible for what Jesus was trying to do was about him trying to get people to refocus on the purpose of the law rather than the letter of the law. Because that's what the Philistines were all about. It's all about, did you cross this line? Did you break the law? Punishment for you. Rather than the process of improving other people, being more holy and close to God and all that. So the law and the way that it was interpreted and enforced changed drastically. I don't know if you know about like the Old Testament laws of if you do these sins, you have to sacrifice this many animals in this way. Whereas modern Christians, at least most of them who I know, no longer perform ritual animal sacrifice. Maybe there are some Christians in the chat who do. My family no longer does this. Sometimes we'll have meat for a meal, but we don't physically, like, ritually kill stuff. But that was the old school code. And then with Christ, there were not really new rules. It was kind of like the old rules don't matter as much as the grace of God and your belief in him and that kind of stuff. Christ died on the cross so that you no longer have to sacrifice stuff because God sacrificed his son.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, it just didn't seem like a very Jesus-y thing to do to overturn that guy's table.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's about symbolism, right? And to flip a table over, it allowed him to convey how upset he truly was in that moment. And if the table was yet unturned, they might be saying, well, here's a guy just walking in, calmly saying words again, just trying to compete with us for the teaching jobs, the professorial positions at this university. But when a table gets flipped over, that's a combat moment. Shit just got real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair point.
I mean, is there mutually supporting historical documents that verify this? I don't know.
Probably not, I would
Full
guess.
disclosure, we probably have some new viewers. I welcome religious discussion. I am an ex-Christian. Ask me anything. As long as it's within TOS.
Well, there may not be much actual historical evidence, but it's probably the case that at some point a long-haired hippie went batshit at somebody at some point in the ancient world.
Well, I do that every day, but yeah.
There you go.
That's
It's not so uncommon.
Yeah.
Based on a true story, put it like that. So it's kind of, we were talking about symbolism. Yeah, symbolism, whatever symbol that you have, be it, you know, like a statue or something more abstract like an institution or even a policy, you know, the more value you put in it, the more actual money you put into it, the more expensive it is, the more grand it is, then the bigger the symbol, the more powerful the symbol is, basically. So
how symbolic are you prepared to be, kind of a thing?
yeah, that kind of thing. You know, that mean, look at the Statue of Liberty or that, oh, what the hell was it? Is that Battle of Stalingrad Memorial in Russia? You know, those are big, giant statues. They could have made them smaller, but that wouldn't have been as big a gesture. You know, it would not have meant as much. So that's kind of where that comes from. And there is a sense among many that the government does not. I'm talking about the United States here. There is kind of a sense among many in the United States that the government just doesn't give a shit what they think. That the government just kind of does what it wants. And there's kind of a sense that part of the reason that there hasn't been more action on the border and border issues is because the government and political elites of one sort or another don't really take it seriously. And that's kind of been festering for a long time now. So there's a lot of people who kind of value that issue, want something done on it, who are kind of want more done now than they might have in the past, just to kind of prove that the government actually is responding to them. You know, there is a sense that they kind of want payback with interest for the sense that they've had over the past few decades that they've been ignored and marginalized. You can kind of debate whether that's actually true or not, you know, etc. That's a whole other conversation. But I think that's partly where that sentiment comes from. You know, that push for a wall and the desire to spend a lot on it. Now might be a good time for the usual disclaimer. I'm not an expert in everything I talk about. This is meant to be kind of more conversational. I know I do most of the talking, but you know, if I say anything wrong, biased, or etc., please do correct me. You know, if I'm wrong, I want to know more than anybody. And I don't read the chat while we do this, but I will read it later. So, you know, I do learn from chat, and it's kind of one of the fun parts of the experience for me. So, definitely do contribute, interact with each other, interact with me, and, we can all kind of learn something, especially me. I'm the one who most regularly makes a fool out of himself on here. Let's see. So I think we kind of covered that question. I think we meandered a bit from the original. I think the original was about generational change, and I'm not even sure how we got
we
onto
meandered. That. We meandered the shit out of that one. That one didn't stand a chance.
Assuming marijuana legalization, could the U.S. replace the drug market in Mexico with more legitimate business? And if so, which types of business could be competitive? I think the assumption that Mexico would legalize marijuana is a big assumption. So I don't know. Given the question, if we assume that Mexico, let's just assume that they did, could the U.S., hypothetically, yes. Hypothetically, U.S. producers could just kind of come in with their usual corporate Starbucks-style pizzazz and dominate big chunks of the market, just by offering that safe, predictable experience, basically. But we actually talked a little bit about this last week. Just because you've got those economies of scale and all that investor money to play with, that doesn't necessarily mean that the market actors. Well, I shouldn't say market act. That doesn't mean like formal businesses will be the dominant actors in the marijuana industry, because there's still going to be a lot of taxes, regulation. Just because you legalize it doesn't mean a lot of people are going to be comfortable with it. It's not going to be like 90% of the population wants to legalize it. It's going to probably be more something like 60, 40, something more in that range. And that 40%. Not quite. But that 40% is probably going to hold up like full liberalization. They're still going to want regulations and whatnot. And that's probably going to be part of the price of conceding to legalization. And as a result, it's probably still going to be cheaper underground. What would you call it? The black market, I guess, will probably still make up a good chunk of it, if only for that reason. So hypothetically, U.S. producers could come in and eat up a lot of market share in like the formal sector in Mexico if it hypothetically legalized marijuana. But that said, I think given that there's probably going to still be a lot of regulations and taxes that push up prices in the formal sector, there will still be a big market for marijuana in the underground economy, because there's going to be people who don't have to pay taxes there, basically, or adhere to the regulations, and they won't have those same costs in their production. I'm not sure what's meant by what types of businesses can be competitive. I don't know a lot about the marijuana industry, so I don't know what different types of businesses there are in there in which you could kind of compete. So that's I do not have enough background there. That's more of a Kukio question. He probably could have answered that.
I've seen some of the establishments in Washington State. It's got quite a few regulations. It tends to be more than alcohol, I think, because it's less accepted in the widespread capacity. Really good for tax dollars.
Yeah.
But lots of different rules about how you can produce it, how you can put it into other products, how much of it you can put into other stuff. Mm-hmm. THC versus CBD are the two different psychoactives, and in what percentage of either of those.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Well, that could be a vector then. You could have different markets for different types, intensities of that.
Yeah, well, the tricky thing, and this is something that's been a factor in this nationwide push for legalizing cannabis, is sometimes a, quote, legalization law gets proposed that would be so restrictive that people who do want cannabis legalized would say no, because they would prefer to wait for something that was more reasonable and economical.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like one of the mini battles that has to be fought for every municipality that wants to assess whether they want it to be legal or not, is how many restrictions do we want to place on it, because it is a drug, it does affect the body, it does have short, medium, and long-term effects, so how are we going to weave this in?
Mm-hmm.
There
Yeah, there's a
are
lot.
there are a lot of effects that the average person doesn't know. That's kind of the flip side with weed and alcohol. Is the effects of alcohol are more universally understood versus the effects of weed. And I think the effects of alcohol are, this might just be a wild guess, but I think they're more consistent across users than cannabis, because the interaction between cannabis and the brain is more complicated than alcohol in the brain.
Gotcha. Interesting. Yeah, there's a lot I don't know about it.
They said that cannabis use for teens was down in a lot of states where it was legalized. I think because they moved the users from the black market to the regular market, and you have to present identification when you enter the door, which is a hassle if you're underage.
Mhm.
Whereas I would guess most black market dealers would not ask for your photo ID.
Yeah, yeah. I was about to say I would.
Nice
I
try,
wonder how
police
they got that
officer.
data. Yeah,
That's
we'll
funny.
see what comes of it. We'll see how the industry evolves going forward. But yeah, I'm not familiar enough with it to kind of answer the question about what types of businesses would be competitive. This is actually, I think, a question from last week. I hope I'm not being. I think these are new questions we didn't get to. Do you remember this one? Pineapple on pizza seems to be a distraction argument when people want to avoid serious arguments. Are there equivalent things from history you can point to that were notable enough to be recorded as a way of diffusing tension?
Oh, I think we joked about the Falkland Islands
Okay.
in regards to that one. So I think we did touch on that.
I think I'm still confused about the pineapple thing. Could you go over that again?
So it's kind of a joke within my stream. When people address something political or religious, oftentimes they just flip a table and it becomes the sports team mindset where no one's going to agree or compromise on anything.
Mm-hmm.
And pineapple on pizza is a food option choice that a lot of people feel very strongly about. So
Yeah.
it's a way of kind of making that comparison and also diffusing the tension by saying that, well, that's a real issue that people get upset about.
Gotcha. Just to kind of illustrate that they
Yeah.
shouldn't take it so seriously.
I don't want to get this into a war, but do you have any preference on that?
Pineapple on pizza?
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever really had it. I can't say the prospect appeals to me, but you know, I'm a fat guy. I'll eat just about anything. If you gave me the choice, I would probably go with something else. But if you put it in front of me and said this or nothing, then yeah, I'd probably eat it.
Amen, brother.
Okay, so I think I understand a little better now.
Yeah.
Are there any equivalent things from history you can point to that were notable enough to be recorded as a way of diffusing tension? Yeah, not really. Nothing that uses kind of that same sort of analogous metaphorical style. You know, I think there's the famous Native American peace pipe that was kind of used during some negotiations. I hope that's accurate, because that kind of feels like one of those things that somebody pipes up and says, actually, that's a myth, that's a misperception, they didn't, yada yada. I think they did that. Maybe somebody can kind of correct me on that if I'm wrong. Yeah, I think you'd find more examples like that, though, than people using rhetorical devices. Because generally, when it comes to things like wars and whatnot, people are not really interested in listening to rhetoric. Generally, you kind of have to do something more proactive. Yeah, nothing comes to mind.
Like hit them with a water noodle?
Hit them with a water noodle. They would notice it. I don't know if it would stop a war, but certainly it would be noticeable.
Why don't they just fight the war with water noodles instead? There would be fewer casualties.
There would be significantly fewer casualties, but if you're in a war where you're going out of your way to avoid casualties, as ideal as that might be, you're probably not going to resolve the original conflict, since it probably wasn't very serious to begin with. If something's important enough to go to war for, it's probably important enough to kill for. That's your trouble with pool noodles. Let's see, I think I did... Somebody was asking about... a number of economists I follow were looking at the spring of 2019 as the start of a domino effect of collapsing economies in smaller countries. Then the EU and Japan, which brings down China and eventually a global economic crash. Any thoughts on this? Too alarmist. I actually responded to this guy in his email, because I remember last week I asked him what economist he's reading about so I could kind of read more about it, since I wasn't familiar with him. I haven't really been able to find it, because there's a paywall to the specific. I have read some people talking about it, and I don't find the logic really convincing. I think it is meant to be more of a worst-case scenario that people who are managing very conservative, risk-averse funds kind of are using to plan ahead, you know, to plan for the future. So I don't think it's likely. I mean, I don't think that there's enough problems globally to kind of make that viable. You know, the major banks in the West are not, like, in great shape, but they're in better shape than they were in 2008. You know, there has been regulatory moves to kind of bolster them, make them more resilient to negative shocks, things like that. So they are kind of in better shape to handle something like that. And I just don't really think there's going to be a domino effect in particular. It wouldn't surprise me if there was some major problems economically in the developing world, because there is a problem with loans being taken out by private sectors in the developing world in foreign currency. That's a big problem. You know, if your economy goes into recession and you're a developing economy, generally developing economies have their own currency. So if there's a recession, the country's currency devalues, but companies that took out a loan in, say, dollars or another hard currency, they have to pay back those loans in dollars still, but they're not making as much money because they probably make a lot of their money in their own country's currency, and again, that currency devalued, so they're kind of getting squeezed. So if there are more problems in developing economies over the next year, there could be more and more companies that get squeezed like that, and that could create problems. But I don't think it's going to be a big enough problem in enough economies to create the kind of cascade of dominoes that eventually drags down the entire global economy to a big global recession or a global economic crash. Hypothetically possible, but I think it's an outside chance of a black swan type thing that is something to plan for. There could be a recession in the U.S. Some people have been talking about that because there's been interest rates inverting. But I don't know if there's enough evidence now to say, one, whether or not it'll really happen, and two, whether or not it'll be a steep recession. I know some people have kind of been muttering under their breath that, you know, they're hoping for a steep recession so that Trump won't get as many votes in the 2020 election. I wouldn't hold my breath for that. I doubt if there is a recession, it'll probably be a cyclical recession, which means relatively shallow, maybe a year or two. It probably won't be too disruptive, but that's just a guess. And, you know, it's not even a really reliable guess, because that's kind of more historical data. But we're living in an era where the economies have evolved past the data, the circumstances, and the equilibria of historical data, of the periods of time for which we have historical data. So it's really hard to predict how economies are going to perform going forward, because their fundamental underlying structure has really changed so much over the past few decades. You know, there's so much technology, international trade now, you know, and so many and demographic changes, you know, things like that. So many fundamental changes that make the current global economic equilibria, for lack of a better phrase, different than previous eras, that it's kind of hard to use data from previous eras to extrapolate what's going to happen to the economy in the future. So we're kind of in uncharted territory. Nobody really entirely knows what to make of it. You know, even central banks kind of worry about that. So maybe it'll be a, you know, mind-blowing, soul-crushing recession, or maybe it's just like what the historical data suggested with just a normal recession. We don't really know. Anybody's guess. I'm sure we'll have a lot of fun finding out. Let's see, so that's it for questions. That's pretty much all we have, I think.
Sweet. Well, I'm about 9 hours in, so let me check the time after this opponent dies. And then we can see. But I was kind of feeling like maybe doing a 2-hour block with you.
That's no problem. Point. You know how I can drone on. so I can certainly fill out the time. How long have we... Oh, you said you would check it, John.
Yeah, there's...
I think we started at like 8. So yeah, about an hour and a half, I guess.
Okay.
About 9:30 now.
Cool.
About 30 minutes, give or take. And if you need to wrap up early, that's fine. I don't want to keep you. And I imagine you're pretty tired after 9 hours.
Or reasonably so. It's been a good day relative to the, like, coming back from a vacation and you're rusty and playing like crap. Given that, it's been fantastic, actually.
Actually, I didn't ask you. How was your vacation?
So, I did that 24-hour stream right before I left, and that just totally messed up my sleep rhythm. And
yeah?
you have, like, the family obligations and stuff. It's like, hey, we're gonna do this thing now, okay. So, with that, yeah. I basically only was well rested maybe 2 of the days, so that was kind of a bummer. So it wasn't really like a recuperation trip. I did get to hang out with family, and there were a lot of really good conversations and stuff, so overall I was happy with how the trip went.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's kind of the important thing.
Yeah, but not quite as restorative as some trips could be.
Yeah, I mean, basically it's jet lag, isn't it?
Yeah, it's self-imposed streamer jet lag.
Yeah.
I don't even need a jet for this.
Yeah, it's unfortunate when you kind of get stuck with that over a holiday or an event or have you. It's just hard to focus and kind of be there, be of the event. I'm glad you kind of had that time off. Is everybody doing well?
Mm-hmm. Well, except for those who aren't, but,
Well, yeah. Fair point.
It's tough stuff.
Well, anything I can do, let me know.
Oh, no problem.
I'll eat a pizza in their memory or something.
Overall, it's been a really good year for myself and a lot of other people. Obviously, it can't be good for everyone, but I would be hard-pressed to complain too much. I actually got to meet a very attractive lady on the security line at the airport. You know how it's like one of those, it's one of those super long lines to get through the TSA, and it's like really long and it winds around back and forth over and over again. I had been standing in the line for like 25 minutes, and it was weaving back, and it's like, wow, it's weaving again here? This sucks. And then I look over to my side, and there's a woman who wasn't there before. And I was like, oh. Well, she's pretty. Hey, what's up? So we talked for a while. It was nice. Just playing it cool. Yeah.
Exhibiting some social skills.
I think the guy behind us thought that, well, he knew that she cut or something, but he didn't say anything.
Good man.
Yeah, it was a fun trip overall. I watched quite a few movies. I saw Venom.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, despite all the things people said about it, I enjoyed it. I thought it was one of those, like, superhero movies that's different enough that it doesn't feel boring, but it's also well executed enough that it doesn't feel bad. So it was just like nice. This is a good movie. It's not going to win Oscars, but it was pretty cool. I thought Tom Hardy did well, and the effects looked awesome.
Oh. Yeah, I'd read some negative reviews. Would you say it's
not that bad. I mean, it's kind of a trend now almost to poop on superhero movies, because there are so many of them that some people, I think, are just tired of it, which is understandable. That's understandable. But yeah, it's not that bad. I would say it was rather good. I also watched The Favorite, which is a period piece, and it's usually in select theaters rather than on all the big screens. And what we didn't know was it has a lot to do with LGBT relationships, we'll say. And if you're going to the theater with some people who have very, I would say, stable conservative Christian values, a lot of the main premise of the film is unsettling. I thought it was fine. It was a very well executed film, from the writing to the directing to the acting, costuming, all that. Really fantastic, but yeah. Probably not the top film to go see with your grandma.
I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm in much danger, though. I rarely leave the house for much of anything, so
Yeah.
I'm in good stead. Oh, cool. I think, I was gonna ask you, well, not ask, but I finally figured out, I was listening to the last time, I guess, we did this, kind of reviewing it, and I finally realized that the thing you sent me about Theresa May, that was actually an actor, so sorry for the confusion.
Yeah, that was Andy Serkis. I was joking with you.
I didn't play the video, but the thumbnail was very convincing, so it really seemed like her.
Yeah. Andy
Kinda
Serkis
sat
is
down.
awesome.
Yeah, does he do a lot of stuff? Is he like a TV guy? How does that work?
He was Gollum in Lord of the Rings.
Oh.
He does a lot of digital characters that
Yeah.
you wouldn't necessarily associate with him, like in the Planet of the Apes movies. I'm pretty sure he's a main character in all of those. He has a very expressive face, but he doesn't really have the look of a lead actor in a lot of stuff, so he doesn't really get those top roles, but he's basically the king of that kind of digital acting where you get all the little nets and stuff all over your body, and you have to act without your normal human physical appearance, but just with the form of your body.
Gotcha. Huh.
He's
Yeah, I
the
hadn't
main
realized.
character in Planet of the Apes. Sweet.
Gotcha. Planet of the Apes.
People
Yeah,
are saying Aquaman is pretty good.
Oh, yeah?
Mm-hmm. I haven't seen it.
No, neither have I. Can't remember the last movie I saw. You know, the only movie I have kind of on I have a big watch list, but the one that I have next up is the new Godzilla anime.
Oh.
Have you heard of that?
Mm-mm. I've heard there's a movie coming out.
Yeah, that's an American movie, but this new one is the third in a trilogy of animated Godzilla movies made in Japan, and it's CGI, which I had mixed. I don't know. I've had a long running prejudice against CGI. I don't know how I feel about that, but it's been an up and down story. I kind of just want to finish it for the sake of finishing it at this point, since I already watched the first two. It's going to have King Ghidorah in it, so kind of interested to see how they manage that.
I got a
Godzilla... Sorry, go ahead.
I got a Crunchyroll account too, which is like a anime streaming service that you can use on your phone or in your browser. We've got a bunch of good stuff. I watched Goblin Slayer, which is a pretty new one. Have you seen it?
Reddit. No, but there was that little controversy, I guess, almost, that popped up in Reddit about it, so that's kind of how I got exposed to it.
Oh yeah. It's yeah. The first episode is very yikes. But it's kind of funny because the rest of the series isn't quite as graphic and horrid as that. But
Really?
yeah, they just want to shock you at the very beginning, I guess.
Huh.
But it ends up being kind of, I wouldn't really say vanilla, but it uses a lot of tropes.
Yeah.
And it executes most of them pretty well. But I wasn't super amazed by it because it kind of felt like, oh, now it's this trope. Okay. Oh, now it's this trope. All right. And then now I'm watching The Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime.
Huh.
Which, there's a genre, maybe someone can tell me the Japanese word. It's a genre of anime where the main character tends to encounter very little difficulty. And there are, like, battles and points of, I guess, it would normally be adversity, but just everything tends to go really well for the main character. And this is one of those shows. So if you have a really stressful job or something, and you don't really have the energy to watch something that's really dramatic and dark and whatnot, I guess that's a good genre for it. No, Ronin is the one that's marketed to young males, young men. There's a different word for it. Someone's asking you if you think that Trump's circus is a smokescreen to hide some dark shit.
No, I don't. He doesn't seem like that kind of guy. He just seems like somebody who just does things.
I thought you were going to say he likes smoke screens.
No, I don't think so.
I mean, they do really well at raves. Just get a bunch of those smoke machines. You're good to go.
I mean, his whole approach to doing shady things seems to be just to do them and then just talk his way out of them however he can. He doesn't seem like the kind of guy that just erects an apparatus of conspiracy to cover things up. It just doesn't seem to be his style.
Oh, shonen, sorry. Shonen is the genre marketed to young males. Yeah. But yeah, Trump, smokescreen, burp-a-derp.
Yeah, so I don't really think so.
Probably not, is the verdict.
Probably not. We'll see, because the Mueller investigation is still kind of ongoing, so I'm sure they'll find something here or there. But I don't, again, I don't think he's a conspiratorial kind of guy. So if he did something illegal, it's probably just because he made a mistake or did something stupid. I don't think he really just went out of his way to conspire with Russians or anything like that. And, even if, whatever mistake or whatnot, if that is indeed ends up being the correct characterization, I don't think it'll have a big political hit for him. Just given the pattern of his political career thus far, so long as it's not anything too dramatic or incriminating, he'll probably be fine. I don't think the 2020 election is going to be won and lost on the back of the Mueller investigation's finding. Now, he might get impeached before then on something else. That's entirely possible. Congress could just decide they've had enough of them. Again, given all the changes in the Trump administration over the past few weeks, he might take a hard turn towards some dramatic policy changes that maybe Congress doesn't like. You kind of see a little bit of that with the Syria pullout thing, because there's a bunch of people in Congress, including Republicans, who were kind of mouthing off about how they didn't like the decision, they didn't like how he made the decision, etc. So I keep saying so, I apologize. The point is, they could take action if he continues to kind of agitate Congress with dramatic policy pronouncements like that. They may take it as a sign that they need to exert more control and kind of roll back presidential powers correspondingly, and that could result in an impeachment at some point. And when I say impeach, I mean just get rid of him. Initiate the process and then follow it through. I don't know, how many Godzilla movies have you seen, Neuro?
Probably about 3.
3?
Yeah, there was that one in the 90s. I think I watched one with you.
Oh, that was the Sony one, wasn't it? The 1997 American Godzilla movie?
Yes.
That
Is
doesn't
that bad?
count.
It doesn't count.
It's bad. It doesn't count, no.
That's not a movie.
I don't think most Godzilla fans would consider that as a Godzilla movie.
Wow.
That's a Roland Emmerich abomination.
Aren't you just the Godzilla expert here? Okay. Well,
What about the other?
The other two, I don't remember which one it was that we watched, but it was not an American film. But why? Is this new one going to be legit, or it's going to be trash?
Oh, I have no idea.
I trust your judgment.
The new Godzilla movie made a few years ago was pretty decent. I like how this transformed into a movie review.
Yeah. This is important. People care probably more about this than,
That's
than other stuff.
I would apply the disclaimer from before, only magnified now, because I definitely have no authority in movie reviews. But I kind of liked the American one from a few years ago. I thought that was better, significantly better than the 1997 movie. So I think the new upcoming one looks interesting. Could be worth it. I don't know. I'm more of a '90s Godzilla guy. That was kind of my era, the High Sci series. I liked that a lot. Sort of that whole Godzilla versus Biollante, Godzilla versus Destroya. There's a bunch of classic stuff from that era. That's pretty fun. If you like camp, for those who are, on the small chance that anybody listening actually cares about Godzilla movies, if you want to watch a really campy Godzilla movie, but from the 90s, a lot of the campy ones from the 70s people have seen. Some of those were even on MST3K back in the day. If you want to watch a campy one from the 90s, watch Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla 1993, I think it was. And that was bizarre.
That sounds
so
awesome.
many levels. Oh yeah, there was time travel, there was, rip-offs of Terminator, like Japan bought Africa in the future and had to go back in time for something. It was some wild shit.
That's a
wild
movie.
Shit. That's a movie. That's putting it mildly. Now, if you actually want to watch a good Godzilla movie, you can always do the original. That was an actual, that was an original horror movie, basically. That was pretty decent. Godzilla '84 is pretty decent. None of the millennial stuff ever really appealed to me. And I hate saying that because I'm sure some people cut their teeth on them, but pretty much everything between Godzilla 2000 and from Godzilla 2000 up until Godzilla Final Wars just was not really that interesting. Godzilla GMK was cool because that was just monsters beating the hell out of each other, which is kind of what you want. If you're a Godzilla fan, you're probably just a big monster movie, kaiju fan in general, so that's kind of appealing. But beyond that, not a lot of great stuff then. Final Wars itself was a hell of a lot of fun, though. Have you ever heard of that?
Final Wars? No.
Yeah, that was before the 10-year break. Toho, what was it? I can't remember the studio's name. I think it was Toho Studios. They decided that they were going to take a 10-year break in making the movies just to kind of restore the brand, because it was kind of getting campy and people were kind of forgetting about it. There was just too many movies, basically. So they wanted to have 10 years where they didn't make any and then kind of have a comeback. And so right before they did that, they made one last movie, and that was Godzilla Final Wars. And they didn't even try to make that like a really original, innovative Godzilla movie. They just basically just took all the funnest stuff about campy 70s Godzilla movies and just made a movie out of that. Like, the whole movie is just a big giant reference to 70s Godzilla movies, and it's fantastic. It's a lot of fun. I don't know how accessible it is to people who are not like into Godzilla movies, but if you are, that's the way to go. That's certainly a lot of fun. Yeah. I'm not going to drag that out because I could go for hours about that stuff. Let's see. What about, did you ever watch, with Kukio and me, did you ever watch Captain Harlock?
I don't think so.
I think you were busy. Actually, I won't tell that story. I'll tell you that sometime. But it's more of a inside joke. Yeah, there was it was an anime called, I think, Endless Odyssey, and it was one of the Captain Harlock anime. There's like a whole bunch of them. It's actually the only one I've seen, but it was so cool that it always kind of stuck with me. So I would definitely recommend taking a look at that if you ever have time. I think you would like it. I think it's kind of your speed.
Sweet.
For anybody who hasn't seen it, there's also, what was it? It was the World War II one. Grave of the Fireflies. I think you have seen that. That was World War II Japan, and it just kind of told the story of some kids who were living there during that period. And very good anti-war movie. Let's see. What do we have here? I've got all this stuff listed here. I already talked about that. I don't know, how much time do we have? We got like 15 minutes, 10 minutes?
Yeah.
What can I squeeze in here? I don't know if we have anybody from the Czech Republic Czech Republic listening, but if we do, I have a question for you. How am I supposed to say your country's name? Because recently, relatively recently, the government over there technically changed the name to Czechia, but I don't know if that's the formal name or if I'm supposed to still use Czech Republic. So please do enlighten me on that. Czechia is a lot more convenient, because then I can just say Czechian this, Czechian that to refer to things from Czechia. But Czech Republic is kind of what I'm used to, so that's still kind of what I think in terms of. Yeah, I think it was a recent change. We already talked about Japan's immigration reform, didn't we?
Yep. I think last time.
I think we got that. Let's see. This is going to be one of our weirder episodes.
It's not as weird as this match I'm in.
Oh, what's going on?
I want to talk about it. Everything that the opponent built was in a hidden location on the map. It was one heck of a journey. One that has just ended. Wow. Thank you.
Did you win?
No. That's fine. So the growing nationalistic sentiments in the USA and Brazil with the result of recent elections. It's been kind of a global thing too, hasn't it? Europe as well is drumming up stuff.
Everywhere. Literally everywhere. Well, that's not what literally means, but yeah, the whole world has seen that nationalist upsurge. It's, even in the Middle East, you see that. Like, with the Saudi, I guess the Saudis are the principal example. Mohammed bin Salman's kind of reform push has been partly predicated on a desire to push nationalism in Saudi Arabia as a kind of ideological alternative to Islamism. So in Saudi Arabia, it's been happening. In Iran, they've kind of discontent with the government, but there's already kind of a populist government in power, so there's kind of a weird dynamic there. But definitely in Europe and the United States and Latin America, with Bolsonaro and Brazil, and with in Peru, they've had a whole thing about corruption over the past year, and there was a guy who got impeached, and there's a bunch of drama around the Fujimori, Keiko Fujimori. Fujimori was he was a dictator from the early 90s. I believe he was a dictator. Somebody from Peru can correct me on that, but his daughter basically kind of cut a deal basically that saw him out of prison for a while, basically as part of the impeachment proceedings that were about to throw out the president who was being impeached for corruption, I believe. But there was a vote, and the vote didn't pass because they made that deal. Then I think he ended up resigning anyway because of something else. So I guess that's not an example of nationalism per se, but there's definitely been political discontent across Latin America in that vein, and it's been feeding nationalism. In fact, Keiko Fujimori was a major candidate in the election that saw Kaczynski elected in Peru, and her whole platform was pretty much nationalist revisionism. Japan's seen more, but they've been quiet about it, which is probably smart. That's the whole Shinzo Abe rearmament plan thing, revising the Japanese constitution. Xi Jinping in China has been doing that. It's kind of part and parcel with the Communist Party trying to entrench itself and kind of reestablish its undisputed authority. It was already pretty undisputed, but the party was getting concerned by the proliferation of civil society groups, NGOs, think tanks, media, all that stuff. They were getting worried about it, and so Xi Jinping and his kind of network, if you like, have been cracking down on that. There's been a lot in India with the Modi administration and the BJP administration over there, centered around Hindutva, sort of this Hindu chauvinism, Hindu nationalism. Yeah, India was not meant to be like a Hindu India. It was originally supposed to be, well, actually both India and Pakistan were supposed to be secular. you know, they were split up based on Islam. You know, Islam was basically the Muslim parts of in British India, and they were carved out into Pakistan. But India proper was not supposed to then be kind of a mirror image that was just like the Hindu India. It was supposed to be a secular republic that incorporated all groups in India. But there was always kind of a Hindu nationalist strain in Indian politics. They didn't like that. You know, they kind of wanted the government to hold up Hinduism and promote them and what have you. So that was kind of suppressed, not suppressed, but the Indian National Congress, which was the principal political party in India for a long time, they were secular nationalists, and so the Hindutva didn't really have a big voice in Indian politics for a long time. But then that started to change in kind of the early 90s, roughly, and they've grown into a significant political force. And they're the guys who are in power right now under Modi. In fact, Modi himself was actually on a no-travel list for a while. For the U.S., I mean. Because he was kind of peripherally involved with this major incident in Gujarat back in, I want to say, the early 90s. It was I'm going to mispronounce it, so I just apologize in advance. It's the Ayodhya Temple, I think. It's this big temple in India. It was a mosque well, it was a mosque at the time, but it had originally been a Hindu temple that was destroyed by Muslim conquerors like centuries ago. So then a bunch of Hindutva in the early 90s got together, and I think it was partly in response to some, you know, violence instigated by some other group or retaliation. I don't remember exactly the details, but basically a big giant Hindu mob attacked the mosque and burned it, and destroyed it. And Modi, because he was part of the BJP and kind of had links to some nationalist Hindus, there was some question of how much of a role he played in that. And as a result of that ambiguity, the U.S. actually put him on a list. And he was on that list until he became prime minister, and the U.S. actually had to take him off so that he could travel to the United States. I think he was eventually cleared, nominally, you know, and that's kind of, with politics, it can be hard to kind of ever really fully clear someone and to ever really uncover the full truth, since people cover their tracks. But that was the issue. That's an example of the kind of, you know, Hindu nationalism that's kind of been ascendant in India. So you see it there as well. And I don't know as much about Africa, but I'll wager probably a fair amount there as well. South Africa, you can kind of see it more at a subnational level, because there's a lot of groups like the Economic Freedom Fighters who really just are not comfortable, don't like the status quo. They feel that it's kind of not a continuation of apartheid, but there's not really as many gains in terms of racial equality and economic equality as they wanted. And so there's been a kind of an upsurge there in terms of sort of, I guess, what you would call nativism. Some trivia for people listening. If you're a white person, but you're born in South Africa, you are still technically African. So you can't really quite say African nationalism to refer to black nationalism in Africa, because African nationalism technically could also apply to the white people who were born in Africa.
Well, right, because a lot of racism is based on the ethnicity. And while a white South African is African, they're also white.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't face the same prejudice as a person of color.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was a
Sorry?
change that I think happened over the past 10 to 15 years, is whether it was okay to refer to ethnically African people as black or blacks. And it seems like, yes, that is okay. Like, they have embraced that, and that is acceptable, because we did African American before, and that was the politically correct nomenclature. But like you just said, there's some trouble spots of people who are not dark-skinned, who are African of some variety.
And I think the term now is person of color. Is that what it is?
Person of color is more of a catch-all, which includes people of Latin American descent and also technically Asian descent and Pacific Islander. It basically means non-white, I think, is the...
Okay. That was kind of my impression, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and just as a word for the travelers of the world, if you don't know the most up-to-date and current term, I mean, you can't know everything. If someone tells you that's offensive to me, I prefer this, then you can just adjust and try to be tactful and respectful about it. Do what you can.
Yeah, that's sort of the status of nationalism kind of around the world. I mean, just quick summary, not everywhere, but just to kind of answer the question, yeah, there's definitely been that nationalist upsurge everywhere.
So if I'm Italian and German descent only, but I live in South America, what am I? Well, that is a really good example of the difference between your ethnicity and your nationality.
Mm-hmm.
Nationality is the nation in which you have grown up and live, which shapes you culturally in a lot of ways. Your ethnicity is more of just your genetic makeup of who you are descended from, of the people of the world.
Yeah. I'm guessing this person is Argentine. I don't know how many people in Latin America have Italian ancestry. It's probably mostly Argentina. I
You're
imagine
taking it as
some...
a quiz question.
Yeah.
Is this a riddle?
Well, maybe Uruguay or southern Brazil, but I would guess Argentina. Yeah, there's that southern cone region is mostly white for the most part. You know, there's a lot of heavy European descent people. A lot of the people of Italian descent there, so it is kind of predominantly European descended as a result.
So we got the verdict. They are from the south in Brazil. Spot on.
Ah, okay. What is that?
You won the quiz. Good job.
Wow, not really. I didn't really pick the specific one though. What was the province I'm trying to... not Mato Grosso. No, Rio Grande do Sul. Yeah, well, I guess you can hear me. Is it Rio Grande do Sul? That would kind of be my guess. I guess Rio Grande do Sul is the southernmost province, but I guess technically Sao Paulo, is that still southern Brazil? Is that still considered southern Brazil?
I don't know.
Hopefully our Brazilians can help us out. While they're buying their new guns, did you hear about that?
No.
Bolsonaro has been talking about how one of the things he's going to do when his administration starts up is to loosen gun regulations so that more people can legally buy and access guns. And he's kind of modeling it kind of on the NRA to a degree. He said that he admires the NRA, so that's kind of the direction he wants to take policy. It'd be interesting to see how that works out.
Rio Grande do Sul, Santa Catarina, and Paraná are the south. I don't know how to do Portuguese pronunciation at all. Santa Catarina is where they're from. Sao Paulo is southeast.
Okay. Santa Catarina. I still need to learn Brazilian provinces. I'm more familiar with them now because I've been doing that podcast that it's taken me all year to do. Still not done yet, but it's taken me... I wish I could say that it's going to be like the quality will be representative of the year's worth of research, but probably not. It's not going to look like a year's long type thing.
Yeah, well, as a content creator, I can just say that anytime you have an idea for a product, it's going to take way longer than that.
Yeah, that's been my experience thus far. I'm still glad I did it because I've learned a hell of a lot more about Latin America than I knew before. You know, before it was kind of not a blank slate, but you know, there's just so much of the history that you don't know about because you don't get exposed to it much. Kind of one of those quiet regions of the world that doesn't get much exposure.
Well, I think we'll call it here.
All right.
It's been a wild ride today. I'm glad that we did an episode. We did no Q&A person, so we got to do some movie reviews. Take those for what you will.
Yeah. I was trying to think of some other stuff that I could think of. I haven't watched stuff in so long.
Oh, I saw Blade Runner 2049. What you laugh?
That sounds like a direct-to-DVD movie.
No, it's the sequel to Blade Runner. That was a big movie. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You said Blade, and my mind immediately went to the vampire Wesley Snipes movie franchise.
No. Harrison Ford, Blade Runner.
Gotcha.
It was fine. Like, there was a screaming child in the row in front of me on the plane, so I couldn't really appreciate a lot of the sound in the film. But the aesthetic of it was really cool. It's a very slow movie, with the way that it moves from shot to shot, which is intentional, and a lot of people would find that boring. The most interesting character to me was the AI that the guy had in his house. She was pretty cool. Yeah, the main character is Ryan Gosling, who plays really stoic characters, and the main character was very stoic, so it all worked out. And then Jared Leto is the villain, who's really creepy, and he's really creepy, so kind of felt like they got a bunch of people who they just play themselves, which meant there weren't really that many glaring mistakes, but also it wasn't really a big surprise.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty good.
So you would recommend it?
Yeah, if you're okay with a slower paced film, which I think you are.
Oh yeah.
I know some people will be like their knees twitching and their eyes twitching and they're like, blah, blah, blah. I can't do this.
I sat through Beyond a Black Rainbow. I can sit through that, I imagine.
Yeah.
Did you ever watch that with us?
Say it again?
Beyond the Black Rainbow.
No, I don't think so.
You might give that a try. It's kind of a 60s, 70s style science fiction movie, and it's funny you actually mentioned the word psychonaut last time, and that's basically the movie. It's kind of a movie about psychological experimentation, telepathy, etc. But it's very old school. But it was actually made like recently. It was like 2014 or something. I was actually really impressed that they were able to make it feel like a 70s movie, even though they made it more recently. That was pretty cool. Yeah, it's not for everybody. It's not like a great movie per se, but it's very atmospheric.
Well, yeah, I sat through the old Solaris. That was a challenge. Wow, it's so artistic the way he holds onto the shot for 15 minutes. Can't believe it.
Yeah, that's one of those movies that kind of... You're glad you watched it, but you're also glad it's over.
Yeah. Cross that one off the list.
There was a remake of that made recently, relatively. It was like
10 George
years ago.
Clooney.
Is that what it was?
Yeah, I mean, it was paced in more of the modern way, so it didn't really feel as strange. It kind of felt more just like a standard sci-fi.
Gotcha.
Whereas the older one felt like an experience that you'll never forget.
Yeah. That's about all I've watched, I think. Well, I caught up on superhero movies. That was the only other stuff that I watched.
Thanks, superheroes. Their real act of courage was giving the movie industry people more money in their bank accounts.
Oh, what was it Kukio used to call it? Modern myth making.
Yeah.
Pretty much what it is. Giving people, a new generation their hero. Kind of fill that role. Latter-day Hercules.
Yep.
Actually, there
Thor.
was a movie. Thor, yeah. It was kind of an artsy, independent movie I saw a couple months ago. I think I might have mentioned it. It was actually I don't remember what the title was. It was a stop-motion movie, stop-motion animation, and it was about a kid who gets separated from his mother, and he has to go on a journey basically to kind of do a thing. I'm not describing it very well. But
so there were some characters and there was a setting and I think there was a plot.
Yeah. I don't... Kubo and the Two Strings. There you go. That's what it was. Kubo and the Two Strings. I really like that. So that's very good. You might enjoy that.
Nice. Well, sweet.
Have you ever seen... Oh, sorry. Dragging it out.
We're stacked up with the movie recommendations now. Go forth, everyone, and browse.
Yeah, you must be tired. I'll let you go.
Well, cool. I'm glad we got to get a session and get the momentum going. I'm going to be grinding pretty hard for January because I had a lot of travel time near the end of last year, or I guess this year. So got to make up for that, trying to get ahead. But yeah, thank you, Agent Smith, for coming on. Thank you, Neuro, for managing questions. Oh, that's me. Nice. This will be on YouTube. Yep, good stuff, dude.
Have a happy new year.
You too. Take care, Agent Smith.